Einen wunderschönen guten Abend alle miteinander. Good evening. I will switch from German to English, from English to German, because we have an international evening today. We are here for a prize for sustainable economic to Professor Steve Keen. And you are so welcome here, Professor Keen, and welcome Mr. Schuster. Sie sind der Stifter des Preises, zu dem Sie nachher auch noch ein paar Worte sagen werden, den wir dieses Mal nicht das erste Mal, sondern das zweite Mal vergeben. Ich sage auch gleich noch mal etwas zur Bedeutung des Preises. Ich begrüße von der Ruhr-Universität in Bochum unseren Laudator, Professor Roos. Vielen Dank, dass Sie die Reise auf sich genommen haben, um hier zu uns zu kommen. Ich begrüße den Dekan des Fachbereichs Umwelt, Wirtschaft, Umweltrecht hier am Umweltcampus der Hochschule Trier, Professor Klaus Helling, und mit Ihnen gemeinsam auch Professor Löhr, der ja auch gemeinsam zu dieser Veranstaltung mit uns gemeinsam Herr Schuster eingeladen hat, um den Preis heute zu übergeben. Und ich danke auch allen weiteren, die dazu beigetragen haben, dass diese Veranstaltung hier heute sicherlich ein unvergesslicher Moment werden wird. Vom Piano und dem musikalischen Intermezzo bis hin zur Technik und allen anderen Vorbereitungen, die es bedarf. And now I switch to English again to welcome our guests here from the region and from our university and our international guests, because what is different in this year for the prize is that it is this time an international prize. And the University of Applied Science Trier and the Environmental Campus Birkenfeld, we are an international focused university. Here from the region, from our environmental campus, to the world, to other countries worldwide around us. When we look into the Nobel Prize this year, it is very close to the prize today. Sie wissen vielleicht, dass der Nobelpreis, der verliehen wird, thematisch gar nicht so fern ist von dem, wofür Professor Keen heute Abend ausgezeichnet wird. Es hat nämlich auch etwas mit natürlich Ökonomie, denn es ist der Preis für Wirtschaftswissenschaften und auch mit dem Finanzsystem zu tun, aber unser Preis heute ist natürlich etwas Besonderes. Our prize is very special because it's a prize for sustainable economy, and in our university we see the sustainability focus not only ecologically but also economically and our social responsibility, and we will speak more about that this evening with the prize which we will give to Professor Keen this evening. So it's a pleasure, an honor to have you here and to have all our guests from the region and international guests to celebrate this evening, to celebrate what we have here on our environmental campus. Herr Schuster, Ihre Idee, diesen Preis zu vergeben, war eine ganz hervorragende. Wir waren, ich glaube, 2 Jahre ist es jetzt her, dass wir mit den Planungen begonnen haben. Die Veranstaltung im vergangenen Jahr, der Festakt, ist mir heute noch in bleibender Erinnerung, und ich gehe davon aus und bin fest davon überzeugt, dass auch der heutige Abend uns noch viele, viele Jahre in Erinnerung bleiben wird. Von daher vielen Dank für den Preis, den Sie stiften, der mit 10.000 Euro dotiert ist. Auch das muss einmal vorneweg genannt werden. Und dass wir auch ein Gremium haben, das daran beteiligt ist, diesen hervorragenden Preis auch auszuwählen, auszuzeichnen und uns vorzuschlagen. Ich freue mich auf den gemeinsamen Abend heute, heiße Sie ganz herzlich willkommen und gebe jetzt erstmal meinen Applaus an Herrn Schuster, der direkt nach mir ein paar Grußworte richten wird, und danach direkt im Anschluss der Dekan des Fachbereichs Umweltwirtschaft, Umweltrecht, Professor Helling. Bitte sehr, Herr Schuster. Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank, Frau Professor Schumann. Good evening to the English-speaking and international guests und guten Abend an die hier anwesenden und deutschsprachigen Gäste. Auch von mir als Stifter des Friede-Gard-Preises ein herzliches Willkommen zur Preisverleihung an Professor Steve Keen, an alle Gäste hier vor Ort und draußen an den Bildschirmen. Ich hoffe, die Übertragung klappt diesmal reibungslos und alle draußen an den Bildschirmen haben ein gutes Bild und einen guten Ton. Vielen Dank für Ihre Zeit und Aufmerksamkeit. Auch diesmal ein großer Dank an die Hochschule Trier, Umweltcampus Birkenfeld, Fachbereich Umweltwirtschaft, Umweltrecht für die Kooperation und namentlich Professor Helling, Professor Löhr, Herrn Stumm für die ganze Arbeit während des Jahres zwischen den Preisverleihungen sowie auch besonders Herrn Professor Roos, der spontan bereit war, diese Laudatio zu halten. Und das ist schon ein bisschen was Besonderes, weil die Lehrstühle an Universitäten sind ja weit überwiegend mit Neoklassikern besetzt, die diese Art von Wirtschaftstheorie totschweigen oder hassen. Gut, das ist jetzt möglicherweise etwas heftig. Dank auch, last but not least, meiner Familie, insbesondere meiner Frau, für ihre Unterstützung dieses Jahr wie auch im ersten Jahr. A most heartily welcome also to our prize winner, Professor Steve Keen, and all our English-speaking guests, some of them even from overseas. Kurzer Überblick zur Stiftung. Die Englischsprachler können es mitlesen. Die Deutschen kriegen jetzt von mir ein bisschen Text dazu. Frau Professor Schumann hat es schon erwähnt, gegründet 2020 in Kooperation mit dem Umweltcampus Birkenfeld als Teil beziehungsweise der Hochschule Trier und Umweltcampus Birkenfeld. Das Ziel der Stiftung, eine alternative ökonomische Theorie zu fördern, die in der Lage ist, eine ökonomisch, ökologisch und sozial nachhaltige Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft zu modellieren. Anstelle des jetzigen Paradigmas des neoklassischen Mainstreams, der sehr einseitig ist und sehr fehlerbehaftet. Dazu stiftet die Friede-Gard-Stiftung den Friede-Gard-Preis, der mit 10.000 € dotiert ist. Letztes Jahr waren die Gewinner Professor Hermann Hagen und Professor Peter Flasche, dieses Jahr Professor Steve Keen. Letztes Jahr habe ich erklärt, warum die Friede-Gard-Stiftung wichtig ist. Das ist nämlich, weil die Wendung der Wirtschaftswissenschaften weg vom neoklassischen, neoliberalen Mainstream wichtig ist. Ja, sogar überlebenswichtig. Denn die herrschende Lehre, die uns in Nobelpreisen begegnet oder bei den Wirtschaftsweisen und bei tausenderlei anderen Gremien, kennt im Wesentlichen nur immerwährendes Wachstum, wichtig, damit alle immer mehr bekommen, automatisches Gleichgewicht, sodass alles immer in schönster Ordnung ist und die Optimalität der zukünftigen Entwicklung, bei der man sogar die optimale Klimaerwärmung ausrechnen kann. Das hat Professor William Nordhaus getan und unter anderem dafür 2017 den Nobelpreis, den sogenannten Nobelpreis für Wirtschaftswissenschaften erhalten. Er hat nämlich errechnet, dass bis zum Jahre 2100 die optimale Klimaerwärmung bei etwa 2,6 Grad liegt. Bei 2200 ist sie noch höher, da liegt sie deutlich über 3 Grad. Wenn man nicht dem Professor Nordhaus glaubt, sondern den Klimawissenschaftlern, dann sind das Temperaturerhöhungen, die vielleicht wirtschaftlich optimal sein mögen, so wie der Professor Nordhaus und seine Kollegen das betrachten, die aber für ziemlich viele von uns ziemlich tödlich sein würden. Diese Grafik, die jetzt hier eingeblendet ist, auch von einem Neoklassiker, dem Professor Martin Weitzmann, der ein schönes Buch zu dem Thema geschrieben hat und der die Daten, die die Klimawissenschaftler zusammengetragen haben, ausgewertet hat und daraus eine Kurve aufgestellt hat, die zeigt, dass sozusagen die für ein Szenario, bei dem 700 ppm CO2 in der Atmosphäre sind, das ist zurzeit noch nicht der Fall, zurzeit sind wir bei etwas über 500, steigern das aber fleißig jedes Jahr um etwa 2,5 ppm, sodass, wenn wir nicht eine scharfe Kehrtwende hinlegen, wir diese 700 ppm gegen Ende des Jahrhunderts oder sogar noch früher erreichen. Was in Übereinstimmung mit Professor Nordhaus ist, dass so als wahrscheinlichste Klimaerwärmung herauskommt 2,5, 2,6, 2,7 Grad. Was diese Grafik aber auch zeigt, ist, dass das vielleicht der wahrscheinlichste Wert ist, aber dass mit den 700 ppm das Risiko verbunden ist, dass die Temperatur auch 5, 6, 7 bis über 10 Grad steigt. Und das Risiko, dass die Temperatur bei dieser Konzentration von CO2 über 6 Grad steigt, liegt bei etwa 10%. Was geringere Erhöhungen wie 4,5 und 5,5 Grad Temperatur, Klimaerwärmung ausmachen, sieht man an den Zahlen, die ich aus einem Buch von Steve Keen übernommen habe. 4,5 Grad heißt 40% weniger bewohnbare Fläche auf dieser Erde. 5,5 Grad bedeutet 60 tödliche Tage in den mittleren Breiten, in denen 74% der Weltbevölkerung leben. Gut, 10% Risiko, damit können vielleicht einige prima leben, aber die das glauben, mögen sich überlegen, was sie mit einem Auto anfangen würden, das das Risiko hat, 10% der Zeit nicht benutzbar zu sein, weil es in der Werkstatt ist. Das wäre dann etwa so jeden 10. Tag. Wenn Sie sich überlegen, ob Sie sich diesem Risiko bei einer lebensbedrohlichen Erkrankung oder lebensgefährlichen Operation aussetzen möchten, mögen Sie auch überlegen. Ich für meinen Teil nicht. Und in diesem Sinne hat auch der Gesetzgeber entschieden, dass das ein Risiko ist, das nicht tragbar ist. Also der Gesetzgeber, der sich um unsere Gesundheit kümmert, hat nicht akzeptiert, dass mit irgendeiner Behandlung wir uns diesem Risiko aussetzen. Gleichzeitig akzeptiert dieser Gesetzgeber seit 30, 40, 50 Jahren, dass wir eine Entwicklung nehmen, wo wir genau in dieses Risiko hineinlaufen. Deswegen ist es wichtig, der Regierung, dem Gesetzgeber, der Verwaltung Beine zu machen und nicht denen blauäugig zu vertrauen, die uns versprechen, dass die Technik schon alles in Ordnung bringen wird, weil das definitiv nicht der Fall sein wird. Und da die Männer dazu tendieren, eher technikgläubig zu sein, mein Aufruf vor allen Dingen auch an die Frauen: Seid mutig, geht voran, bringt die Männer und alle anderen zur Vernunft. Okay, in conclusion, this diagram shows a 10% risk of making our planet inhabitable in most areas. Such a risk would not be accepted in any sector of vital importance, e.g. medical treatments. And this risk is not acceptable for our climate also. So let us push our governments to take immediate counteractions. Don't believe promises that with technology alone everything will be fine. Technology will be needed, but technology alone cannot do it. And because most men are likely to be techno geeks, I ask the women to go ahead. So Einstein has given us an aphorism. Two things are infinite. Also zwei Dinge im Universum sind unendlich. Das Universum und die menschliche Dummheit. Aber bei dem Universum bin ich mir noch nicht ganz sicher. Wir wissen heute, dass er da durchaus die richtige Intuition hat und das Universum zwar unvorstellbar groß ist, aber endlich. Und hoffen wir, dass sich die Intuition von Professor Einstein auch nicht im zweiten Punkt bewahrheitet. Das wäre uns allen sehr zu wünschen, sonst wird nämlich aus diesem Scherz bitterer Ernst. Der Scherz ist, zwei Planeten begegnen sich, der eine sieht ziemlich scheußlich aus, der andere fragt ihn, was hast du? Die Antwort ist Homo sapiens. Beruhigt ihn der Erste, keine Sorge, das geht vorbei. Also, höchste Zeit zu handeln. Thank you for listening, thank you for understanding. Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und ich hoffe, wir kommen zum Handeln. Vielen Dank.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. My name is Klaus Helling. I'm the Dean of the Faculty for Environmental Economics and Law. And I would like to save some time, that we stay in time, and this is why I have got now the pleasure to introduce our musicians, the well-known Hemi Donnier, who has prepared and developed a version of a well-known title from Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the G-Moll Symphony, in his interpretation, and following this little booklet you find on your desk. Let's go in the groove. Many thanks that you are here.
Zur Preisübergabe. Der Friede-Gard-Preis 2022 geht an Professor Steve Keen für sein bisheriges Lebenswerk mit bahnbrechenden Arbeiten, die wichtige Erkenntnisse und Bausteine zur Modellierung einer nachhaltigen Ökonomie liefern. Sein Ansatz für eine neue Ökonomik berücksichtigt, dass das Wirtschaftsgeschehen einer komplexen, nicht-linearen Dynamik folgt und verzichtet auf die fehlerhaften Grundlagen der alle Forschung und Lehre fast monopolartig beherrschenden neoliberalen Klassik. Die Ehrung betrifft insbesondere die Übertragung von Hyman Minskys Financial Instability Hypothesis in ein aussagekräftiges mathematisches Modell, das den Einfluss von Geld und Schulden, insbesondere Privatschulden, besser verstehen hilft. Zum Zweiten die Schaffung eines mathematischen Modells einer einfachen Wirtschaft mit ausdrücklicher Einbeziehung von Energie und materiellen Ressourcen, was das Ausmaß der ökologischen Krise besser erkennen hilft. Drittens, die Schaffung von Minsky, einer überaus leistungsfähigen und einfach zu bedienenden Systemdynamik-Software, besonders ausgelegt für die Erstellung dynamischer Wirtschaftsmodelle unter expliziter Berücksichtigung der Geldseite durch die Integration eines Systems der doppelten Buchführung mittels der sogenannten Godley-Tables, nach Win Godley, einem Pionier des SFC, Stock Flow Consistency Ansatzes. Dear Steve, I present the Friede-Gard Prize to you for your work, with even more appreciation now after getting closer to you the last 1.5 days. I wish you all the success for your plans for your future works. May your health and funding luck provide the basis for establishing the research team and delivering to us your magnum opus, which is already clear-cut in your mind. I hope that many people will join me in that, since your future work promises to be very beneficial to all of us. Most sincere thanks for your work and congratulations. And now it's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I better just get to my correct point. Do I make speech or just...
We get a photo taken.
Pardon me, I've never done this before.
No, me too. Stay here.
Okay.
It's just they have a wonderful... Okay. So viel Zeit muss sein.
So, thank you. I'm trying to get to the right point in the presentations here. Thank you. Okay, are we on screen or not? Ready now? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Well, many thanks. As I said, I'm an amateur at prize ceremonies, at least on the recipient side, and I'm very grateful to Gerd and to the whole collection of people here, some of whom are friends of mine from over almost 2 decades ago, in fact. So I'm very grateful, very pleased to be receiving a prize which does not reward a believer in the neoclassical religion, but tries to bring about a genuine new sustainable economics. And I'm very pleased with the footsteps that I'm following. I didn't know Herman Harken, but I did know Peter Flaschel. Peter was someone I knew at Sydney University because he was working with a very close friend of mine, Carl Chiarella, who was another person who should have received an award like this for very original work in non-equilibrium economics. And my award is Gerd has said, is for mathematical modelling of Hyman Minsky's financial instability hypothesis, for modelling an economy including both energy and natural resources, and for building Minsky. So what I'm going to go through in my talk here is how I see all these as elements of a genuine complex biophysical systems approach to economics, which is what we need to get away from the delusional fantasies and deadly fantasies, unfortunately, of neoclassical economics. I've made a bit of a mistake on my animations there, so I'll live with that. Somewhere inside that crowd behind that banner saying Political Economy Department now, you'll see me, a much younger me. I did economics, maths and law at Sydney University between 1971 and 75, and I can actually now say that I've been a rebel against economics for 51 years because my point of departure from neoclassical economics occurred in July of 1971. And the reason was I was exposed to part of the theory you're not supposed to learn as an undergraduate student, called the theory of the second best. And normally you learn about this in honours year or master's or PhD qualifying courses. And by the time you've swallowed 4 years of neoclassical theory and then see one way in which it leads to an unexpected outcome, you just treat that as a frippery, something not to be worried about. But when I learned that right in first year, I realised that my so-called education in economics was mendacious. It was effectively lying to me. For example, the textbook we had, one of the textbooks was Samuelson. In 1966, Samuelson conceded defeat in the Cambridge controversies over the nature of and the measurement of capital. And that wasn't even mentioned in our course. So I ended up leading a student revolt against the teaching of economics, and it was successful. The Department of Political Economy was created, but as I say there, they actually, the political economy staff and students, except for me, saw mathematics as the enemy. Mathematics was the tool of the neoclassicals, therefore it was the enemy. But as I've coined a phrase, neoclassicals don't do mathematics, they do mythematics. It's the application of higher mathematics to wishful thinking. Actually, lower mathematics, if you know enough about mathematics, is trivial. So I ended my education. I didn't become a lawyer. I ended up doing school teaching for a while and then working in overseas aid. And I had an accidental career, which has been actually very important for me, as a software editor for computer magazine. So if anybody wants to know the story, I'll tell you how that happened later. And I ended up reviewing computer programs during what you might call a Cambrian explosion period in computer software. Enormous number of different programs. I personally reviewed more than 65 different database programs. Just that one field. So it gave me an enormous exposure to computer software, and that's turned up in what I'm doing at Minsky. I then worked in what was supposed to be a social democratic initiative of the Labor government, which got turned into wage restraint and inflation fighting by neoclassical trained and believing public servants. So I realised I couldn't fight them in the bureaucracy. I had to go back and fight them where they were bred. Okay? I had to go back where the alien was and kill it. And I've tried doing that, and unfortunately they're still alive. They're going to kill us before we kill them, unfortunately. So I started a master's when I was 31. I became an academic over 34, and I began my PhD when I was 40. So quite a late start. And interestingly enough, I'm very pleased that this ceremony is taking place in Trier, because my initial work in economics was to prove that Marx's philosophy contradicted the Labour theory of value. So I very much enjoyed going to Marx's house while I was here. It's a lovely double side effect of winning the prize and being awarded in Trier. And I was inspired by Hyman Minsky's John Maynard Keynes, which for those who don't know is not a biography. The title is chosen in tribute by Minsky to Keynes, explaining the financial instability hypothesis. And I realised that Minsky had chosen the wrong foundation for building that model. So I built my own using Goodwin's vision. I'll show you that in a moment. Then I wrote Debunking Economics in 2001 and again 2011 and became fairly famous because of that. And the essential point that I realised when I extended Goodwin's model to include money, which is what Minsky enabled, it went from a two-dimensional model to a three-dimensional model. And as we know from complex systems, you need 3 dimensions to have chaotic behaviour. So that's a vision of Minsky, of Goodwin's model, regular periodic cycles done in my Minsky software. And this is what happens when you bring in the 3rd dimension of debt. You get this weird phenomenon that when I first saw it in 1992, when I first built the model, my reaction was that the strangest thing about this model was the diminishing and then rising cycles that it predicted. And I finished up my paper by saying the chaotic dynamics in this paper should warn us against accepting a period of relative tranquility in a capitalist economy as anything other than the lull before the storm, which I thought was a nice piece of rhetoric. Then I watched it come true with what the neoclassicals called the Great Moderation, which they took credit for. And from my point of view, that was a precursor to a financial collapse, which is what we saw in 2008. Now, when I first built the model, I regarded it as building a maybe idiosyncratic extension to a maybe idiosyncratic model. But I've realised since then that I can actually derive that model by taking strictly true economic definitions. The employment rate is the number of people with a job divided by population. That is definitionally true. The wages share of output, wages divided by GDP, also definitionally true. And the debt to output level, private debt divided by GDP. When you differentiate that with respect to time, you get 3 logically true statements. The employment rate will rise if economic growth exceeds the sum of change in the output to labour ratio and population growth. The wages share of output will rise if wages grow faster than GDP, and private debt ratio will grow if private debt grows faster than GDP. They're strictly true definitional statements. Now you can turn it into a model by very simple behavioural elements. You don't need all the neoclassical nonsense about rational behaviour, meaning the capacity to accurately predict the future, which is how they define rational. And what you get out of it is a model that generates the same behaviour as I showed you in that flowchart a moment ago, using an extension to strictly true definitions. I might come back and show that in my Minsky software. I'll just actually quickly see if I've got the right one loaded here. And this is Minsky, if those who haven't seen it. And I'm simulating it now where I've left out the dimension of debt. And then while I'm running the model, I can bring in the dimension of debt, and then suddenly you see that change from periodic behaviour, stable periodic behaviour, to a breakdown. So I'll stop that quickly. I'm getting something from my, yes. Ah, that wasn't turning up. Oh, it was, okay, good. Okay, but I'll go back now to the slideshow. So is that correct? Good, okay, all right. And that's similar to Lorenz's model. And in that sense, actually, I see this as a foundational model for the dynamics of economic complexity. And it can be extended by simply adding more of reality, expand the definition of GDP to be more than a widget, multiple commodities, expand the financial definitions and so on. So that's one of the initial contribution I made. What I've been doing recently is working on energy. And this is, I think, the most dangerous and deadly element, as Gerd said in his own presentation. We have neoclassical economists innately believe that capitalism is stable and cannot be challenged by anything. Therefore, climate change can't be a problem. And those morons, and that's being polite, those morons simply assumed that having a roof over your head will protect you from climate change. And they got worse than that. Now, what has happened is people in finance who don't know how bad theoretical foundations of economics are take this seriously. So you may have seen this staff member of the HSBC coming out and saying that don't worry about climate change. 3.6 degree increase in temperature will mean we'll lose 2.5% of GDP. Let's say 5. He said, you won't even notice. Okay? Now that's the mentality that exists in finance and of course in a lot of business and government in general, and it's being created by neoclassical economists, with actual scientists advising them, not our delusional colleagues inside this discipline. We would have taken climate change seriously. And we're seeing this decade, the beginning of the breakdown of the economy, which will be far, far, far worse than these idiots believe. And their numbers were made up. And this is one of my favourites from Nordhaus in 1991. For the bulk of the economy, it is difficult to find major direct impacts of climate changes over the next 50 to 75 years. Manufacturing, mining, utilities, finance, trade, you can't see how they're going to be affected. Now this actually originates in their production theories. You all know they used to use input-output models, which were at least realistic in the days of computable general equilibrium models. Now they just use the Cobb-Douglas production function or the CES function. And there's no role for energy in that, or matter for that matter. And so my insight actually, while I was in Bob Ayres' house in Paris about 4 years or 5 years ago, was simply how do we bring energy in? Well, the thing is labour and capital without energy. Labour is a corpse, capital is a sculpture. Without energy, they do nothing. So therefore, they're an input into labour and capital without which work can't be done. And waste is also inevitable, because you will not convert all the energy into useful work. So what we're going to see is a plunge in energy as we realise just how drastically we've destroyed the biosphere. And if you ask a neoclassical economist, that won't matter. This is the sort of stuff that you find in neoclassical literature. And I really resent the amount of nonsense I've had to read because of these people. It's like being forced to read phlogiston theory as a chemist in the 20th century. This is what they've forced me to go through. So that particular paper of mine shows that, for example, they assume that 90% of GDP will be unaffected because it occurs indoors. It's in tipping points. This is a recent paper involving somebody I had some respect for until he became a co-author of the paper, Gernot Wagner, where they said that losing the 8 major elements of the current climate, the Arctic summer sea ice, Greenland, West Antarctic, Amazon, etc., would add 1.4% of damages to the damages done by having a 6-degree increase in temperature. We'll be dead, all of us, long before we reach those temperatures. So what we're facing is an economic and social breakdown, and we're now seeing that happening with those climate catastrophes that have started to become apparent this year. And because we have not done nothing for 50 years, again courtesy particularly of Nordhaus who trashed the limits to growth, rubbished it, and meant it was never taken seriously in policy circles. When we are forced to no longer use fossil fuels, we will have about an 85% fall in the energy that we're able to use for production, which will mean a catastrophic decline in output. Now, again, another German academic, I think some of you might know, Rudi Bachmann, now based in Washington University. He wrote a paper very, very recently saying that a 10% fall in energy for Germany would only cause a 1.5% fall in gross national expenditure. And the reason was he was applying a Cobb-Douglas production function and then a CES function. And a strict Cobb-Douglas production function says a 10% fall in energy would only cause a 0.3 or 0.4% fall in GDP. Why? Because you will substitute other things for energy. What is the substitute for energy? It is simply ludicrous to believe in that way. Whereas post-Keynesian prediction, using the Leontief production function, is if you have a 10% fall in energy, you'll get a 10% fall in GDP. So there's what neoclassicals inherently think, the trivial impact from losing 10% of energy. The best they can do with the CES gives you about for a 10% fall in energy, maybe a 2% fall in GDP, whereas the post-Keynesian Leontief approach says a 10% fall in energy, 10% fall in GDP. And that gap between theory, delusional theory and reality is coming our way right now. Now, the amusing thing is that Bachmann rejected the possibility of a Leontief production function applying because he said, well, if factor markets are competitive, so that factor prices equal marginal products. In other words, if neoclassical theory is true, okay, then the price of energy will jump dramatically and the price of other factors will fall to zero. And since that hasn't happened, we can rule out the Leontief production function. The trouble is the data shows there is virtually a one-to-one relationship between change in energy and change in GDP. The red line is energy, change in energy on an annual basis. The blue line is change in global GDP, gross world product. They're on the same scale. It is one-to-one. So reality contradicts neoclassical theory yet again. And what we face is a collapse in output, a collapse in capitalism, I expect, courtesy of its defenders. The biggest enemy of capitalism are its greatest fans, neoclassical economists, and we're going to pay the price for it. So just to explain why that is, the Leontief function has output being capacity utilisation times capital divided by an empirically derived ratio between capital and output. When you work through it, and I'll go through quickly because I know I've gone slightly over time, you can then say capital as an energy process has the number of machines times the energy consumption per machine times the proportion of that energy that is turned into useful work. So what you find is the Cobb-Douglas, the Leontief production function, which is basically in terms of things like widgets, is fundamentally saying that output is capacity utilisations times machinery times how efficiently those machines turn the energy inputs into useful work. And so that empirical regularity is actually underexposing the real role of energy in production. So that's what I've been now, I'm trying to expand that into further models, basically Minsky models that include energy, include waste, include resource depletion. And what you get out of it is that fundamentally the post-Keynesian way of thinking about the economy is already realistic about energy. Just that the realism has been obscured by using a ratio, V, rather than what it actually is, which is the efficiency of conversion of energy into useful work. So that's again another Minsky model that I'm trying to extend. And what it predicts, of course, is that everything will look fantastic until it all collapses in the last 20 or 30 years. And we're quite possibly in that last 20 or 30 years now. So what I'm now currently working on is I attempted to bring matter into the model as well. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but John Hicks's paper that gave us the ISLM model was actually written in 1935 before he read anything in Keynes. And he tried to model a very valid, very respectable attempt to bring in matter as is part of the input production process for manufacturing. But what he used was bread. You had bread as the consumption good, and bread was also the investment good. Now, bread is a very sensible consumption good, but how do you make capital equipment out of stale bread? Okay, you got stuck at that point. So my little solution was to remember a movie called The Iron Giant. And I imagined an unrealistic consumption good of iron consumed on the planet of the Iron Giants. But of course their iron is a realistic investment good. You make blast furnaces out of it, you make mills, you make mining equipment. So it meant that I could actually then model a 3 inputs and 1 output system where the output was iron, which could be used for consumption by the Iron Giants, or the inputs as the manufacturing and mining, and waste is necessarily there. In fact, I needed to use conservation of matter to show that the inputs to the blast furnace were iron ore, and the outputs were iron and slag. So these various ideas of conservation of matter, thermodynamics, are turning up in the economics I'm building now. It's got a long way to go before it's a finished model, but that's showing the basic dynamics of it. And I want to generalise it to multiple inputs and multiple forms of waste, bring in a financial sector, and it's a foundation for a realistic biophysical monetary model of production. Now, a large part of my computing training pointed out the importance of having software that will enable you to do the intellectual efforts you're trying to do in business and so on. So I've designed Minsky, and I hope to have some of you turning up at the seminars I'll give in the next couple of days, where I'll go through showing how Minsky is used. And what it actually gives us is not simply double entry, but octuple entry. Because when you put the entire system together, you get 8 times the elements, up to 8 times the different flows will turn up in a set of tables. And this is, I could not have designed it without my long-term friend and colleague, the computer programmer and PhD in physics, Russell Standish, who's run brilliant code to enable Minsky to be run. So that's I know that if I simply only contributed my papers, they might disappear. So the idea is to contribute software as well that encapsulates those ideas and makes it possible for new generations of students to do realistic modelling of a monetary, biophysical production economy. And that's the main thing that I hope that is my legacy after I cease operating as a life form on this planet. So Minsky is free. It's available on the SourceForge website. I'll jump over these various elements about it, but I'll put the presentation through to Gerd and you can pass it around. You can see how it works. I do hope that people can turn up for those seminars in the next couple of days. I'm also being a bit of a mathematical tyrant. I'm not making it possible to model difference equations in Minsky because I believe that's one of the reasons that economists have taken so long to understand how the economy actually operates as a dynamic system. I see difference equations as the crack cocaine of the economist, and one of the lines in my manual is friends don't let friends use periods. So I'm trying to move my fellow post-Keynesians away from thinking in periods and using the wrong modelling tool. I'm not the best modeller in Minsky anymore. A wonderful Canadian, simply school graduate. He didn't do the university degree, but he's a clear polymath, has become the leading builder of models in Minsky. So that's his model of world too. And all these things will be available, and I'll talk about those in the next couple of days. I'm also aware that we live in poverty. Us non-believers in the religion don't get the funds from university research groups. We don't get the Nobel Prize. That goes to geniuses like Ben Bernanke. Okay. So we're never going to get enough funding to do what we need to do. So I've built a commercial extension for data analysis on top of Minsky that I call Ravel. And I'll talk a bit about that tomorrow in the seminars as well. And I hope to be able to make enough money out of selling that to fund what I hope to call the Keen Institute, so I can keep this research going after I disappear. And I'll be distributing that to my patrons and my supporters on Substack and to the people in the audience in the seminars tomorrow. So thank you again to the Friede-Gard Foundation, and to Gerd in particular, for the recognition and the support. And really, we are in a race for survival. We are likely to see the destruction of the physical capacity to produce in the next decade, in my opinion. I'm really that pessimistic. So we need to do something rapidly and radically to build an alternative economics, and we need to be ready to point out that we are in this dilemma because we have trusted neoclassical economists, not the people in this room, obviously, but the people outside this room who treat them as experts simply because they take the mantle of this. And I'll finish with a quote from John Blatt, who was a great Austrian refugee to Australia and a professor of mathematics at New South University. In writing in '83, he said, "At present, the state of our dynamic economics is more akin to a crawl than a walk, to say nothing of a run. Indeed, some may think that capitalism as a social system may disappear before its dynamics are understood by economists." Unfortunately, I think that's very true. Thank you, and I hope to see some of you at the workshops tomorrow and the day after.
So, first of all, I have to apologize for my bad voice and my coughing in between. I can assure you, it's not COVID, it's just an ordinary cold, right? So I'm tested, so don't be concerned. So, dear President Schumann, dear Dean Helling, dear Mr. Schuster, dear Professor Keen, dear guests. It's really my great pleasure to give this honorary speech, because the topics that we have been talking about today, and I will be talking about, this is really important to me. So it's really serious business that we are talking about here, and I'm very, very delighted that I have the opportunity to speak here. So most of us know or feel that the way of living, of our way of living, is not sustainable, right? But many of us are not aware of what not sustainable really means. It means that our way of producing and consuming destroys our livelihood. We run the risk to make our planet uninhabitable for most humans in the near future. We have heard this before, and I completely agree that this is true. So in the face of this existential danger, one should expect that we do everything to secure survival, right? So this would be logical. We means all humans individually and collectively. Sustainability is often perceived as a scientific, technological problem. So the idea is, well, scientists and engineers must look for ways to make our production less harmful to the natural environment. So such attempts are really important, but that's not the core of the problem, I believe. Above all, sustainability is a socio-economic problem, not a technological one. From a technological perspective, we must simply reduce the amount of pollutants we emit into the environment. Well, it's not simple, because it has massive effects on our economy and the way of living. So, sustainability is a key economic problem, right? Therefore, one might believe that sustainability is at the heart of economic analysis. But this is not the case. Currently, sustainability is a peripheral topic in economics. Steve Keen has been advocating for a change in economics for many years. He points to omissions and mistakes in economics and proposes alternatives. So we have seen this before. But this is a very difficult endeavor that requires enormous personal commitment. Today, Steve Keen received the Friede-Gard Award to honor this commitment. In the next minutes, I try to explain why the work of Steve Keen is so valuable and what he has contributed to the economics of sustainability. So we heard about the Minsky model, and we heard about financial economics, and I would like to focus a little bit on economics of sustainability. In order to recognize Steve Keen's achievements, one must know something about so-called neoclassical economics. So we have heard about neoclassical economics before. Neoclassical economics dominates, so this is the mainstream, this dominates research and teaching at most universities all over the world. Even at my department, at most departments, whenever you go to some standard university, some normal economics department, what you find is neoclassical economics. Neoclassical economics depicts an abstract and unrealistic world with mathematical models. Mainstream economists are very proud of these abstract models because they emulate, well, 19th century physics. Those models give economics the appearance of science. It's really important to stress that the problem is not the use of math as such, but the way neoclassical economists do the modeling, right? That's what you call the mathematics, right? It's not mathematics, but it's mathematics. Steve Keen has been pointing to many problems in the past 50 years, but I will limit myself to just two. So, first, neoclassical economics assumes that the world is inherently stable and tends to converge to a general equilibrium, right? And this is basically the ultimate utopia. In general equilibrium, all plans work out, everything is fine, everything is efficient, right? So this is kind of the heaven on earth for the neoclassical economists. So this general equilibrium is disturbed by some random events called shocks, which cannot be predicted, but which can be described by the means of probability theory. The neoclassical world has a stable structure, and this is important, to which it always returns after some random shock. Second, neoclassical economics considers the economy as an isolated system that can be analyzed without any reference to the natural environment. Right? So we have seen the production function, and in neoclassical economics, in the production function, there is no nature, no energy, no raw materials, nothing. Right? So it's basically completely detached from the natural environment. These two aspects might appear technical, but these unrealistic assumptions are of enormous importance. Let me start with the economy as an isolated system, detached from the natural environment. Capitalist market economies generate and need economic growth. So growth stabilizes social systems, it mitigates social conflicts, it creates employment, and it promises social advancement. 2 weeks ago, the new British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, talked about her 3 political priorities: growth, growth, and growth. Right? That's what she said, right? So it's all about growth. Neoclassical economics assumes that the economy can grow without limit. Why? Well, due to technical progress and human ingenuity. Right? This belief, of course, is absurd in a finite world. And what you see here are the pictures from the limits to growth, right? So this is a stylized version from the simulations that were done for the book for this famous report, The Limits to Growth. The Limits to Growth are, well, this is the title of the famous report to the Club of Rome, which which was presented in 1972. These limits are of physical nature, right? So here in this graph, you can see resources, and they are depleted, right? That's the red line here going down. And you always also have pollution, right? Pollution is going up, and both are detrimental, of course, to growth, and both are limits from 2 different sides, from the input side and also from the output side, right? And as you can see here in this run, population goes down, industrial output per capita goes down, food per capita goes down. So this is one of the runs from the Limits to Growth model, the World 3 model. Well, as I said, the production of goods requires raw materials and energy, and it inevitably generates waste and waste heat, right? From a physical perspective, the creation of order in the economy necessarily creates disorder or entropy in the environment, which ultimately threatens our existence, right? So similar to what we see here in this picture. The neoclassicals neglect these physical facts, which implies that the neoclassical economists have no idea how to end the growth paradigm. Even worse, the end of economic growth is seen as undesirable, right? because then well-being would stop. It would not, not stop, it would not increase any further. Neoclassical economics believes in the feasibility of sustainable or green growth, which is an illusion from the physical perspective, at least as I see it. So why is the assumption of a stable world a problem? Well, this follows from neoclassical climate economics. So we have heard about William Nordhaus already. So this is William Nordhaus, who received the Nobel Prize for his contributions on economic growth and climate change. Well, it's not a Nobel Prize, it's a Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, so it pretends to be a Nobel Prize. In fact, Nobel, did not want a prize given to economists, right? So this is really something, paradoxical. So this could be interpreted as a good development, so that he got the prize for climate economics. It could be interpreted as a good development in economics, but it's actually not, right? Because in the way he does it, this is actually dangerous, right? So Nordhaus does a cost-benefit analysis of the costs of mitigation, of climate mitigation, and the cost of climate damage. And the result of his analysis is that the temperature increase of 3.5 degrees until the year 2100 would be optimal. Well, he has different versions of the model. In this model, you can see these orange boxes here, right? So, and this is what he calls optimal in this model run. So this was published in the American Economic Review in 2018, right? So he believes that 3.5 degrees temperature increase would be optimal. Well, climate scientists are really stunned by this result, right? If you talk to climate scientists, they just shake their heads. They warn us that the temperature increase of more than 2 degrees would trigger tipping elements leading to dramatic changes in the climate system. Then the world would not be stable and completely different from the world humans have been inhabiting in the past 10,000 years. Right? It would be completely different world. Nordhaus pretends that it's possible to evaluate the risks of such tipping elements in an economic cost-benefit analysis. This kind of climate economics trivializes climate change and contributes to the climate action delay of the past decades. Right? So, for a neutral observer, these assumptions of neoclassical economics are absurd, right? One wonders why such assumptions are made and in such an obvious contradiction to reality, right? So how can it be? And I would say, well, the reason is a misdevelopment in economics. We have now a dogmatism in economics that really has the traits of a secular religion. And I'm not the only one who believes this. I know that Steve Keen also talks about the secular religion. And here is an article from The Guardian from 2017, which tries to explain how economics became a religion, right? So, and often, and I find this very telling, non-mainstream economists are called heterodox economists. Well, this is a term from religion, right? So there is the orthodoxy, so these are the right believers in right faith, and then there are the heretics, right? So which are the heterodox economists. So the traits of a secular religion are the division in the world in orthodox believers and heretics, strong opinion leaders, a strong hierarchy within academics, and a tight control of education, right? So the system would like to, or wants to replicate itself, and for that you of course need a tight control of education. Furthermore, there is a strong intolerance towards other views and the determination to defend the own position by all means, right? And we have all this in neoclassical economics. Every heretic must be prepared for massive opposition, for instance, professional and personal attacks, and also being muzzled and ostracized. right? So I think this is true. This is everybody who dares to question what the religion does will be opposed. Steve Keen has been facing this opposition during the past decades. Since his time as a student, he criticizes neoclassical economics fervently. He fights a tough and unfortunately a rather lonely fight. His merits are twofold. On the one hand, he relentlessly exposes the weaknesses of neoclassical economics that lead to absurd results, like the ones of Nordhaus that I've mentioned. He axes the roots of the neoclassical paradigm. On the other hand, he reminds us that the economy is not an isolated system, but has a foundation in nature. The economy is hence subject to the laws of thermodynamics. It requires energy and produces entropy and hence damages the environment. These are very important achievements. It follows from the work of Steve Keen that we cannot attain sustainability by small steps or minor adjustments. The current economic and political recommendations towards sustainability are not sufficient and distract us from the fact that we need a fundamental system change. Steve Keen fights against a belief system as Galileo Galilei did, right? So we saw him here, so he's kneeling here in front of the altar, right? And you have all the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, the Holy Inquisition. So he, as Galileo did, like the Catholic Church fought against the heliocentric worldview, neoclassical economics resists the view of an economy subject to biophysical laws, right? So this is very unpopular. The Vatican rehabilitated Galileo 360 years after convicting him for the suspicion of heresy. So he was lucky, it was just a suspicion of heresy, right? It was not heresy itself, because otherwise he would have been burned, but it was just a suspicion. So what he got was he was arrested at home, right? We must hope that economics changes its minds with regard to Steve Keen much earlier. We cannot carry on as we currently do for the next 360 years. The Friede-Gard Award might help encourage other economists to follow the example of Steve Keen. We need more economists to join him with his critique. Of course, non-economists capable of system thinking and understanding these issues are, of course, welcome too. Congratulations, Steve Keen.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Weltklasse am Umweltcampus, die Musik von Henny Donier und dem Perkussionisten, dessen Namen ich leider nicht kenne, der mich aber auch total begeistert hat. Und dieses Stück, was wir gerade gehört haben, kommt von dem deutschen Klassikkomponisten Johann Sebastian Bach. Das war interpretiert aus der A-Moll-Suite von Teil ihr und Valide. Also ganz toll, wir schicken nochmal gerne einen Applaus hinterher. Ich möchte es doch mir auch nicht nehmen lassen, den Preisträger herzlich zu gratulieren und mich zu bedanken für Ihre Ansprache und auch die tolle Laudatio von Michael Roos, eine sehr gute Zusammenfassung dessen, was wir brauchen, um mit dem Klimawandel fertig zu werden. Die Prognosen, die gerade in dem Buch 3 Grad mehr von führenden deutschen Klimaforschern geliefert werden, die machen ganz deutlich, dass man dort auch mit ökonomischem Sachverstand gepaart von viel größeren Auswirkungen einer 3 Grad Erwärmung der Erde auf die wirtschaftliche Entwicklung ausgeht. Man rechnet mit mindestens 10% Reduktion des GDPs und ist an der Stelle genau auf dem Weg, der gerade von Steve Keen präsentiert worden ist. Und ich glaube, die Notwendigkeit eines Umsteuerns wird an der Stelle zunehmend erkannt. Und deswegen freue ich mich besonders, dass dieser Preis, der Friede-Gard-Preis, in diesem Jahr an Steve Keen ging. Und ich danke nochmal ganz herzlich Herrn Gerd Schuster dafür, dass er sich so einsetzt für die Organisation dieses Preises und uns, die das am Rande der Kapazitäten miterledigen, entsprechend drängt, dass wir das auch organisieren. Ich freue mich und ich glaube, ganz viele von Ihnen haben ganz viel schon mitnehmen können. Die Schlussworte der heutigen Veranstaltung wird Gerd Schuster noch sprechen. Ich denke, dass wir mit dem Programm ein bisschen flexibel umgegangen sind, macht gar nichts. Ich fand das so sehr gelungen, wie es gelaufen ist und freue mich sehr auf Ihre Schlussworte, wünsche uns und Ihnen allen hinterher noch gute Gespräche. Nutzen Sie die Gelegenheit, ins Gespräch zu kommen. Die Verpflegung und die Getränke, die werden ja schon quasi nebenbei gereicht. Das finde ich super. Da haben wir sozusagen die Effizienz erhöht am heutigen Abend. Vielen Dank dafür an das studentische Team, das uns hier so wunderbar versorgt. Danke auch nochmal an die Technik mit dem Markus Klassen. Und der Bernd Winter sitzt auch noch dahinter, ganz versteckt. Aber es klappt super heute Abend. Ich freue mich auch, dass hoffentlich diejenigen, die uns zugeschaltet sind, viel haben mitnehmen können, uns gut verstanden haben und wünsche allen, auch die morgen an dem Workshop und übermorgen teilnehmen, dabei ganz viele neue Einsichten. Vielen Dank dafür und ich gebe das Wort jetzt noch an Gerd Schuster. Sorry for our international guests that I mostly spoke in German language, but I'm sure that you got the message due to my body language as well. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Helling. Thank you to the musicians. I was again flashed by their performance. I had listened to them some years ago and was impressed by the energy and cohesion and power and everything in this work or in this music. And I hope at least some of us can take as a paradigm of how to work together powerfully to make good work and good sound. So my presentation, System, Dynamics, Economics, a look back, aside and ahead. One result will be that you should remove the dots. So one outcome is system dynamics economics. So let's start with the overview, look back, some names, bit of the past, look aside, some other sciences, a look ahead. The mainstream economics is its deficiencies and the new paradigm, new economics in the sense of Steve Keen and others who work in some ways alongside. I think it's worthwhile to remember J. Forrester, in some way the father of system dynamics, who published some books which are worthwhile reading even today. Two of them I have mentioned, Industrial Dynamics and World Dynamics. In World Dynamics, he proposed the world model, which then was deeply explored by Dennis Meadows, Donella Meadows, and their group. And the idea of system dynamics is meanwhile broadly adopted in many sciences, especially in climate science. And important for that approach is a systems view, that you see your object of study as a system consisting of parts, but being together a whole and embedded in an environment. And the second point is dynamics. Systems are not static, but they develop in time, and they may develop very differently in time. One means to study systems is such a causal loop diagram. It's not very relevant that it's so small. What you can see is that there are a lot of aspects which are connected by arrows, which show the influence from one part to the other, or from one criteria to the next. And that's a very natural thinking. Each one applies that in many everyday instances. And J. Forrester, as you see, the first book was about industrial dynamics. It was an economics book. And it was at the initiative of the Club of Rome. It was applied to the question if on a finite planet, infinite growth would be possible. And Dennis and Donella Meadows, let's say, were the masterminds of this work, together with a lot of other important people. And the first report was 1972, but updates of this report followed. And even this year, there is a report who reminds of a lot of important things. They used this World 3 model of J. Forrester and had essentially 5 big blocks in the model. The subsystems: population, capital, let's say more or less the industrial sector, agriculture, natural resources, and pollution. The report was published in 1972. A technical report was published 2 years later with all the equations and sensitivity analysis, etc. And this gap allowed especially William Nordhaus to attack them for doing studies and research without facts, with let's say out of the blue sky. They didn't do that, but they were because the details were not published then, they were attackable, and they had not the possibility to defend themselves in the top-level journals which Nordhaus and his colleagues had access to put the perspectives right. So let's say, I think Steve's expression, trashed, is better. I didn't only come to killed. So it went into the waste bin. And that's a pity for the development since then, since these 50 years. Okay, wrong direction. I also want to put into the public the important contribution which Hartmut Bossel, a German scientist, has made. Well, it is a bit the problem, maybe not only of Germans, but also other nations, to leave some of their original thinkers aside and easily forget them. I hope that will not happen, because he, let's say, is a kind of mastermind of system dynamics in Germany, a pioneer in ecological system dynamics. He has done important work let's say, overall in the world. He is, I didn't know the English word, Energiewende pioneer. He led studies and influenced studies who showed, I think, 40 years ago about that it is possible to cover our energy needs from renewable sources. We wouldn't need this fossil fuels. In Germany, that has led to some development, but not as fast and as good enough. Another important part of his work is the books which he has written. They are available in English and in German, which demonstrate and lay out very clearly how to work a system dynamically. And a nice piece of the work is his System Zoo, where he, in 3 volumes, where he shows examples of systems which are completely modeled, and they build up and get more complex in the later parts. They start with the simple mechanical or physical systems, then go to ecological systems, and finally also to economical systems, and at last to the World 3 model. And of course, there he has also the equations. And the fine thing is that these models are available on his website, fully runnable as Vensim, models programmed in Vensim. So each one who likes can study them, play around, change parameters, etc., and extend the models if he wants. Okay, and the other fundamental contribution is that he has thought about, let's say, systems and their environment. What are relevant criteria for systems if we want to think in the direction of a system design? And you see this figure. It has 6 points from the environment, answered by 6 criteria from the system itself. And if you can read it, optimality, which is an obsession of these cost-benefit analysis of neoclassical economics, doesn't play a role. Important for a system is its effectiveness, meaning that it arrives at its target and that it survives. Other parts also important, but optimality is in nature, for example, not very relevant. Okay, now the look aside. I start, let's say, with my conclusion of this look aside, and that's complexity you see in many scientific fields. And the system control perspective and the system design view is used also in many fields. And they are differently advanced, but it's always worthwhile for people who know a bit from that to have a look aside and learn from them. And the other way around is that people who are experts in these fields possibly can contribute to progress in economics, since economics is also a complex dynamic system underlying biophysical laws, etc. And I hope we reached some of them, and they are invited to contribute to this field also as far as they like and as far as they have resources for that. So one look aside is to biology. You have cells which are finely structured. There are many fine structures for specific purposes. Let's say a cell similar to a firm. And there is a fine regulation inside the cell. These cells, so as a subsystem, are already complex. Then they form bigger systems, the organism, and even bigger systems, supersystems, ecosystems. And there in ecosystems, you see what we see in an economy also. Many species, competition, cooperation, synergism, etc. Food chains, web of life, and regulation is mainly by self-regulation. I will show an example afterwards. Inside the cell, biochemical pathways shows all the reactions in such a cell. When I was having courses in this field, 1970s, the citric acid cycle was in the center. You can, in the top figure, you can see it as a big, like a big clock. The knowledge about the biochemical pathways inside the cell have tremendously multiplied. The citric acid cycle now is only a small spot in the center. So you really see how much progress has been made in such a field compared to economics, which essentially has made no progress, aside from using more sophisticated mathematical methods, which are only used to put some clue on unreliable foundations. The brain is a special system which is researched by thousands or hundreds of thousands of researchers. It's an excellent paradigm for a complex system. You have again the parts, the neurons, which have special abilities, among them to connect to very many other neurons, and even to build new connections. That means they are able to learn. And they are embedded in a system which you can call neural networks. And there you have several effects which are in analogy to things which happen in an economy also. So there can be, and they partly have very, very clever models, very advanced methods to study what happens in the brain. I think we can learn from them. Medicine as a whole field. I see another analogy. Medicine is much about pathology and pathophysiology. That means the search for causal material roots of a disease. And that's a complex subject. For long COVID alone, there are at least 3 mechanisms discussed which lead to long COVID. Yes, you can learn there also how to handle vague and unclear situations, how to form concepts, etc. Of course, you also see that the people in medicine struggle very hard with these difficulties. But well, the next stage is diagnosis, to see what disease a man or woman has. And that's a very complex task. It's similar to a pattern recognition task, where you have thousands of possible diseases. And then you want to find a therapy. Similar to what we try in economical politics. And sometimes we have a therapy which is right to the cause of a disease. In many, many cases, we have only symptomatic things. And that's for the school medicine alone. There are alternative approaches also, similar to economics, where we have a lot of alternative approaches, and the alternative approaches are not recognized by the mainstream. For some of you, maybe computer science is nearer than the other examples. You have again similar structure, parts, and a system. And here I took the computer as the cell of such a system. Is also has a fine structure inside. Here's hardware, software. You can use a lot of analogies to other things. And you have computer networks where these parts work together, store information, process information, produce information, have kind of adaptation and learning. Okay, so that was the look aside. Now for the look forward, one look to mainstream economics. We have heard that to some extent already. They are focused on equilibrium optimization, which is far from reality. They are focused on growth, neglect energy, material resources, nature, neglect climate change and pollution. All these things are no issue because you have plenty of everything, and if maybe you would not have plenty of everything, you could substitute, and all the problems are finally solved by technology. So innovations will bring us forward, will solve everything, will fuel further growth so that we are all happy. Okay. And mainstream economics has a very big political impact. As I said before, these are the people to which politics listen. They are in the German WISE economics team, which produces every year big reports of some hundreds pages. And they have a monopoly practically in teaching and research. What Professor Roos showed us how they replicate themselves, and dissenting opinions are suppressed. The new paradigm should be what Steve Keen has termed new economics. There are other titles also, complexity economics, biophysical economics. In a core of this approach, they are similar, but in fine detail, they are of course different, but there's much overlap. One perspective is dynamics. So we have again cells, firms, household, holds economic agents. We have regulation of the parts of the system within the system. The paradigm is by markets and prices, which does not work in many instances because usually prices, no, maybe not usually, but in many instances, prices do not tell the truth. That means externalities are not included. So the price of gasoline is, even if it's high now, it's lower than it would cost if the environmental damage done by it would be included. Okay, another other perspective is complexity. Steve Keen mentioned that in his, demonstrated that in his presentation. Economic systems have many dimensions, and from 3 dimensions onwards, chaos is possible. That means equilibrium is not guaranteed. And even if an equilibrium exists, its stability is not guaranteed. Complex systems show self-organization. There are methods available to handle these things. Synergetics is, in my view, a very, very important part, which is often not contained in books about self-organization. That's Hermann Haken has a similar fate as Hartmut Bossel. He is not estimated as he should be. So if you have to do with self-organization, work on that, you should have a detailed look into his works. And the tipping points which the climate scientists have are, in this perspective, phase transitions. Phase transitions gives you a bit of clue if you think, for example, of water, where you have ice, the phase transition to water, and the phase transition to water vapor. And phase transition means that in this new phase, totally different, maybe not totally, but very different rules apply. Ice is something which behaves very differently from water, and water vapor behaves very differently from water and from ice. And we are likely to undergo in our development such phase transitions, and new rules will apply, and we may not like them. Okay. Look to Steve Keen's New Economics. He has worked, seen backwards very systematically. The Goodwin model in 2 dimensions, Keen-Minsky model, added the monetary side in 3 dimensions. He has come out recently with the Goodwin model with energy and matter, which also has 2 dimensions, but includes energy and matter and gives important insights to that. And of course, you can see, and Steve is working on that some natural extensions lie clearly on our working canvas. Multiple commodities, multiple wastes, and bring into this model the monetary perspective. Okay, since Steve himself has described that deep enough, I can skip over these. I think a central question is the battle between the proponents of green growth and the small minority of people who speak of green shrinking or green degrowth. The green growth proponents see that we can decouple growth from material input and from energy use. And concerning energy and their pollution effects, they say we will have an abundance of renewable energy at low cost. The sun is shining all the days in the year. If we use only 1% of that will cover all our energy needs. We do not know how it turns out, but even in this perspective, there is an important point to consider, and Tom Murphy has written on that, our growth ambitions in a finite world, and the waste energy of energy use will, even if we have no CO2 emissions, will generate a warming, and within 200, 300, 400 years, Earth will be too warm to live on. The other perspective is green degrowth. The question is, how can that be managed? But the necessity, in my opinion, is very, very clear. We have an ecological footprint of more than 1 ton of CO2 per year, and our available budget, let's say, would only be about 1 ton. We are globally, in the global perspective, we are well above that, and in the Western advanced societies, we are, let's say, 5 times, 10 times, 15 times of our budget. And there is also a distribution aspect to that, because the rich households have a much larger CO2 emission than the poor ones. You see the figures, about 120 tons in the top 1% layer, and roughly 5.5 in the lowest 5% layer. So the necessity to do something is clear, at least what concerns CO2 emissions. The perspective of the proponents of this green degrowth scenario are that renewable energies remain expensive, since the resources to produce this capital goods will become more and more scarce. Empirical, we have always seen a rebound effect. That means if some innovation needed less energy or less material, then we build more of these products. Or for cars, we try to have cars with less consumption of fuels. The engineers have made progress, but in parallel, the marketing people have seen that the consumers like to buy cars which are of the double size and the triple horsepower. So it's nowadays in Germany rather normal to have a car with, let's say, 160 or 200 horsepower. When I was young, cars had roughly 1/10 of that, and we were mobile with these cars also. Okay, how to manage a green degrowth? One proposal is manage it as the British Empire has managed its war economy. That means rationing and strict production only of essential goods. Rationing means, at least is intended, same share for everybody. Instead of what we have now and what is heavily defended, that everybody gets according to what he or she can pay for, or what he has or she has the power to enforce. Okay, we'll see. So some wishful thinking to come to the positive side. In economics, we need to quickly develop an alternative paradigm to the mainstream economics. And hopefully it will happen that researchers and money is attracted to this field. Within the alternative approaches, maybe we need more cooperation and bundling of resources in the kind of master plan who gives for all the groups a clue where they want to target. We have to unite the resources to build this better paradigm fast, because that's already a saying in political discussions that the next 10 years will decide. And I hope it's also possible to do a better self-marketing to gain more resources. In the political sphere, we have, in my view, a situation where the bad things to come and the cuts which have to be made in our present life are not communicated and are not discussed. And well, even with green degrowth, it's not the goal and not necessary to end in times as the old Romans. We can, of course, have technology, etc., and internet and good music and all this, but we have to behave different. So I think it's important that we have a discussion and we accept the truth about the critical situation, meaning also that we accept that technology alone will not fix our problems. We need technology, but they alone will not fix it. So, something wrong with my... That's an older version. This one should say, no, not again this slide. We have seen it before and we don't like it. So an old version, sorry. Yes, I said it before in my so-called 5-minute speech. We need political action, and we need also scientific action. And I hope we will find, especially among the young people, enough people who take this action to allow us to prevent the otherwise coming catastrophe. Thank you very much.